Hello, St. Mary's, and a special welcome to all of you who are a little bleary eyed today after watching the game last night. So, would love to hear how your celebrations went last night. I had the pleasure of having gone to school in Philadelphia. I have a lot of Eagles fans in my life, and so I gained a little respect for them last night because usually it's just, oh, we got the refs are against us and all that. And certainly there was a call last night that seemed to go in one direction. But most of my Eagles friends actually said, it'd be nice if we played defense at least a little bit in the second half. So I gained some respect for Eagles fans last night. Very grateful for that. But would love to hear, who'd you have last night and did you enjoy the game? I thought it was a compelling game with maybe a tinge of a disappointing ending. But as I jumped around a variety of commentary this morning, as I often do on a Monday after an NFL game, it seemed to me that whether we were clear about it or not, that religion was very much on the menu last night, both in some of the things that were obvious and there were some things that were hidden. The thing that was obvious, and I'm sure you caught this if you watched the game, were the Jesus Gets Us commercials. Now, I had heard about these. I knew they were coming. I didn't know a lot about them. I did a little research on them. And so I learned a little bit more about where they came from and what they were trying to do. And I would love to discuss with you. I wonder what you thought of them. Much of the commentary I heard was about those who sponsored the ads and what they were trying to do. And a lot of questions around, is it better to spend millions of dollars on ads or, as some of my friends were saying, on the poor? Interesting question. And I wonder how you thought about it, what you thought about those commercials. The other sort of religious impulse was far more subtle, but was almost exactly applicable to what we've been talking about in Sunday morning worship. We talked yesterday on Sunday that spiritual formation doesn't end at the benediction. We don't hit pause on spiritual formation. It continues into our daily activities. And surprise, surprise, liturgy doesn't end when we pronounce benediction either. Our culture is awash in liturgy, and the Super Bowl is one of our country's most visible liturgical celebrations. And it breaks down exactly as church worship does. It asks the question, of gathering. Who is gathered? Why did they gather? Who gets to be in? And also, by the way, who gets left out? There is the idea of hearing. What is the explicit message? What is the underlying message? Who gets to say those messages and who chooses those messages and why? There is responding. We are always in a liturgy asked to respond. And so what actions are we expected to take and how do they serve my life and serve others? And then finally, sending. We are sent back into the world. And what is the message that we go to the world with? What are we to be? And the underlying question underneath all of liturgy is that if there is liturgy, then we are being asked, one might say, to worship. And the question is, who or what is the object of that worship? And that question was being asked for hours on end last night. I saw at least 3 well-defined liturgies going on last night. But one of the interesting things about the Super Bowl is that all of these liturgies are like mixed together in this really complicated mess. But let me try to sort out what I saw last night and would invite your conversation about them. The first liturgy is, of course, football, or one might say sports. And sports is so unbelievably liturgical because there's a rhythm, a series of practices we expect from any kind of sporting event, but particularly from a football game. There are the warm-ups, the team introductions. We get the establishment of the good guys, the team I'm rooting for, versus the bad guys, the team they're playing. There is uniforms or appropriate dress. There are anthems and songs. There's coin toss. Even the ebb and flow of football itself. Play, huddle. You might get a touchdown dance or a celebration in there. All of that is formational. Football and sports is a liturgy of identity. Who are you for? Who do you identify with? The second liturgy that I saw was a commercial liturgy. And I'd like to make this point here that marketers might be our culture's most astute liturgists. They move us from where we are to an action that they desire us to take. But we can evaluate that through Christian eyes. We don't have to just assume marketing. We can evaluate it. We can step out of it and say, well, what are they trying to do? And of particular note to me was the use of a couple of techniques in the commercials that feel very churchy to me. One of my favorites was the presence of throwback commercials. We had the John Travolta like Grease takeoff. There was the Serena Williams like Any Given Sunday thing. There was the Tony Romo Caddyshack. There was the play on emotion. I forget the company, but there was some dog commercial that everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm weeping. This is crazy." There were themes. One that I see a lot are like the deadbeat dad versus the competent mom thing. All of these playing on our desires and on our emotions and trying to connect with us ultimately to get us to do something. And usually that the thing they want us to do is buy something. And so as Christians, we can say, well, wait a second. How does that form us? What does it say when they claim us as consumers? And the final, and perhaps the most grand and glorious of all of them, was sort of a national liturgy. Our nation, the United States of America, is awash in liturgy. Anthem. Last night we had anthems, we had flyovers. We even had this sort of hinting at the idea of saints. There was a reference to Pat Tillman last night. We kind of hold him up as this exemplary American. And the question we will have to ask ourselves again is, how is that intended to form us? Now, what I thought was really interesting last night, and of particular note in the conversation following, was that in this liturgy, we had a real liturgical clash. The question I heard was, what happens when you change the liturgy? Because there was a real significant change to our national liturgy last night. Because I didn't see one person complain about the anthem or complain about the presence of America the Beautiful. I didn't see anybody complain about the flags. I didn't see anybody complain about the flyover. But I did see Twitter blow up because of the singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is known as the Black national anthem. Why did we respond so stridently to that? The inclusion of that and the responses to that were very, very intentional. So again, I ask, because it is a liturgy, the change was made for a reason. How does that change form us? And how does Lift Every Voice and Sing change the formation that is intended in our national liturgies? Now, my point sitting here today is not to evaluate those liturgies, to evaluate sports and commercialism and our nation. I'm not responsible for those liturgies. I don't create them. The church is not responsible for those liturgies, but we are responsible for how we interact with them, how they form us, how we think about them. And so the question I want to leave you with this week as we continue to think about liturgy is this: what can we learn from those liturgies that might strengthen our own worship to the one who loves us more than anything? Because that is where our loyalty ultimately lies. Not to consumerism, not to teams. I would go so far as to say not even to a nation. Our loyalty is to God. And so how can we learn from the liturgies that surround us and learn to worship God better? And in worshiping God better, we discover who God has made us to be. And so I invite you not only to think about this, but leave some comments. If you're on the YouTube page, leave some comments there. If you're reading this in the prayer email, drop me an email, drop me a conversation, shoot me a text, something like that. Would love to discuss the liturgies that played out in complicated and yet wonderful ways last night. And I pray that you have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you at all of the stops along the way this week, whether it's in prayer or in worship, small groups, the other stuff we got going on. Hope you can hang out with us. Thanks so much for hanging out with us here. Peace and good, y'all.